Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Josh Packard, Executive Director at Springtide Research Institute. And we've been hearing from a lot of you on social media, email, other places around in this time of social distancing, stay-at-home orders. We know that you want to reach out to the young people that you work with. And certainly the research that we did for Belonging, our newest report, confirms that that's exactly what you should be doing. But somehow we've become so beholden to these programs. We've become so used to the way that we normally do things that some of us are asking, like, well, okay, if I called or texted a young person that I work with, I would say, how are you doing? But you wouldn't know maybe the next thing to say. So we're going to have a series of videos here where we sort of talk to some experts that tell us exactly, give us some concrete ideas about what we can say. And to that end, we've got the team here, the whole team from the Institute for Youth Ministry at Princeton Theological Seminary. Abigail, Megan, Carmel, say hello.
Hello.
Yeah, and Rachel's here too, which is great. And the question that I want to start off with is this notion about listening. So I just want to get a sense, y'all have done a lot of work in this area. You put all kinds of resources and do research all the time. How important is it for trusted adults and leaders, ministry leaders, to just make themselves available to listen to young people, to let them know that they're around, and that to simply communicate that message to just get started?
Well, I can kick off. And, Josh, we did talk a little bit and got together before this conversation. And I would say the overarching consensus from our team is the word very. If you're asking how important, we would say very, very, very important. And one thing that we talked about is that, suicide is the second leading cause of death for young people in the United States. And that suicide is connected to isolation, mental health issues, and this, the study that you all have coming out on Belonging certainly talks a lot about isolation and the way that young people are navigating this really difficult moment. And I would say, how important is it? Well, it's as important as young people are to us. It's as important as the air we breathe, right? It's crucial for our relationships with young people, for our relationships with each other. It's a life or death thing that we're talking about. So I think if we're trying to figure out whether we send that text message, or whether we make that phone call, or whether we jump onto the family Zoom call that we are so Zoom weary or digital platform weary, it may be worth it for the young people who are in our families, who are in our communities. Even just walking outside and engaging with the young people in our neighborhoods is so incredibly worth it, from 6 feet of safe distance, right? Of course.
I love that,
when we
Abigail,
go out in our neighborhood.
You said it's as important as young people are to us, which is just such a lovely way of saying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is the question, isn't it? The question before us is how important are they? This has been a crisis that I think we have been hearing again and again, particularly impacts older people. Although, who knows, we're still in the midst of figuring out exactly what this virus is about and does, and how it impacts people. Of course, also people with pre-existing conditions. But we've all heard the stories of the 5-year-old and the 15-year-old and so many more. And I think in the midst of this, it can potentially be lost that young people matter in the midst of this crisis as well, and how important they are to our communities, to whether it be our faith communities, our families, our schools, our neighborhoods, recognizing that they're there and having the willingness to even reach out and ask the prosaic question, how are you, is, I think, actually, it can be life-changing for a young person, especially if you yourself, I think the second part of your question there about how important is it for trusted adults to reach out. My question then, for my challenge and encouragement for people watching this video, would be, what are you doing to be someone who is a trusted adult for young people who are in your lives? What are the kinds of things that you're doing that's counteracting a narrative in a time in our history when I think that young people feel and are experiencing a kind of dystopian reality? We've seen this rise in superhero and dystopian art and literature and movies right now where young people are called upon to be the saviors, to be the heroes. And then we're watching that unfold all the time on news networks and on screens, with young people sticking up for themselves and their rights to go to school without being shot. People striking for the climate. We're watching that enactment of these young people taking matters into their own hands. And I just continue to wonder, what does it look like to be the kind of trusted adult that is making a space where young people don't have to live into the dystopian reality that they currently seem to be living in? What are the characteristics of a trusted adult, and how do we embody that and encourage that during this time?
Well, and it seems like just like simply showing up and being present can be part of that answer of what it means to be trusted, and doing it consistently, which is, I was doing part of what we're doing for the launch of Belonging is we just released the first episode of a season of podcasts where I've been asking young people, 13 to 25-year-olds, to take a piece of our data and have a conversation with me about how that shows up in their lives. And one of them was telling me a couple of weeks ago as we were recording, they're like, oh, well, it's way more common that I feel invisible and completely unseen than that I feel acknowledged, because we were talking about this framework for creating belonging that starts with noticing young people. And they're like, I never feel noticed. I was like, oh, okay, you're right. Like, we need to back up a few steps. Yeah.
I think I would love to piggyback off of what Megan was saying in regards to trust. I think that it's hard to trust. I mean, I'm thinking, I'm not that far removed from being a teenager, only 10 to 15 years ago, but I'm thinking that the adults that I trusted the most were the adults that trusted me and trusted that I can actually handle certain situations to some extent with support. And one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of youth ministers thinking about, how can we support our young people? How can we continue to minister to young people? And one of the questions I've been exploring with alongside the IYM's work, with the Law College project that I'm working on, is youth agency. So as we're thinking about how can we be trusted adults to young people, how can we be trusted adults alongside young people in this season? And so one of the things I'm thinking about is a story of one of the congregations that I'm working with in this project. And the youth minister, I was asking her how she's doing and asking her that question. And she's saying, right now she was feeling a little discouraged because she hasn't been doing as many things with the young people as she had planned and wanted to do, partly because she was starting to come down with what she understood at the time as symptoms of COVID-19. And she was a little concerned, so she self-isolated. She wasn't able to engage as much. What turned out to happen was that her young people actually showed up on her doorstep, brought her groceries, brought her food, brought her all these things. And she was reflecting back to me how she was spending the last few days thinking about how bummed she was that she was seeing all these other youth ministers showing up for their young people online and over Zoom and all of these other means, and she wasn't able to engage in this way. Come to find out that this has actually taught her a lesson about youth agency in her context, and that how the young people are those who stepped up and ministered to her in this season. And in the early days of this, COVID-19 coming to the surface and people figuring out what in the world the coronavirus is, it was said that older folks should stay home and the young people were out in the streets. I had never seen as many young people on my block as I did those first few days. Because there was a sense of, we can be free now. We can break out a little bit, right? Now we've tempered that down a bit. But all that to say is, I think when we're talking about being there for young people, showing up for young people as trusted adults, I think that there is, as much as we as adults feel an itch of we want to contribute, we want to help, there are a lot of young people who are feeling that way too, and might even feel a little stifled because they might not have the authority, the agency, or some adults might see them as, you don't know what you're talking about, or you don't have the understanding that I do. And echoing back to what Megan was saying, we have seen over the past few months and even years that young people have been rising up in media for climate change and for injustice and for police brutality in ways that older adults haven't. And so I think I'm thinking about our role as trusted adults, and I think allowing young people not only to be part of the people that we have a heart for, but also co-conspirators as we think of solutions in this season as a congregational community.
Yeah, it's another way of listening, right? To paying attention to what they're doing and what they're able to do, and not just what your preconceived ideas are. Like, that's another way of showing up and listening to where their hearts are at and what their intentions are. Rachel, you've done this work before as a youth director. You've worked with young people. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've dabbled a little bit in youth ministry prior to, alongside my coworkers all being graduates from the seminary as well. But yeah, I think that something that we discussed that was simultaneously so important is knowing that though it is very important, the importance of that is to also do the self-care as the caring adult as well, to show up as best as you can for those young people. And then also knowing when to model at the right times that it's okay to be vulnerable and not okay sometimes too. So yeah, of course it's important to show up, but doing that work and taking the time that you need as the caring adult in the appropriate moments is also important.
Yeah, thanks. Well,
discomfort. I was just going to add on to that to just mention, like, I think that the discomfort that adults sometimes feel in approaching young people comes from all sorts of different places. But, sometimes I think that it's a lot of our own unresolved trauma as adults that has occurred in our own adolescence that makes us afraid of, oh, is this young person going to bully me the way I was bullied in high school or something. So you talked about the need for consistently showing up and consistently being there. And Rachel, adding on, to what you're saying, I think that recognizing that there's a way that we can attend to what's going on within ourselves in those interactions that might actually provide the fertile ground for some really rich conversation with young people. And if you feel awkward, that teenagers feel awkward all the time. I mean, just embrace it. It could be an awkward interaction, but it'll mean the world to a young person for you to consistently be there and show up.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for this initial conversation. We're gonna take a break here and come back with a couple more of these questions. But this is incredibly productive. So I think, like, the takeaway for me from this is that one thing of, like, just show up in your awkwardness. Your intention is super important, and young people will see your intention to want to hear them and to want to pay attention to them as something that helps to create these lasting and durable kinds of relationships that they really, really need. So even if it's awkward, even if it doesn't super go well the way you're thinking it's going to go, it sounds like there's real value in just being there. And that's true from what the young people told us in the data. And it's also true from, what you're hearing from experts right here who've done this kind of work themselves and done this kind of research themselves. So thank you.